Have you ever noticed how some people don't leave a relationship expecting it to end? They leave expecting you to come running. They walk away expecting tears. They go silent expecting messages. They disappear expecting panic. And when none of that happens, they are completely unprepared for what comes next. Because the one thing they never imagined was that you would simply let them go. Most people think a narcissistic person leaves because they're done. Not always. Sometimes they leave because they're testing something. They're testing how much power they still have. The narcissist expects pursuit because in many cases, they have spent years building relationships around an imbalance of emotional power. Rather than viewing connection as a mutual exchange of care, respect, and understanding, they often come to see relationships as a source of validation, attention, and control. When conflict arises, they may withdraw affection, create distance, become unresponsive, or even threaten to leave. Not necessarily because they want the relationship to end, but because they expect their actions to trigger a predictable response. They anticipate that the other person will become anxious, fearful, and desperate to restore harmony. This pursuit reassures them that they remain important, influential, and emotionally central in the other person's life. Over time, this dynamic can become deeply ingrained. Every text message sent in panic, every apology offered to avoid abandonment, and every attempt to repair a situation they created reinforces the belief that they can dictate the emotional climate of the relationship. The pursuit itself becomes more valuable than the actual resolution of the problem. What they seek is not always understanding or reconciliation, but confirmation that they still possess the ability to command attention and emotional investment whenever they choose. This expectation is often rooted in an underlying need for external validation. Beneath the appearance of confidence may exist a fragile sense of self-worth that depends heavily on constant reassurance from others. When someone chases after them, it temporarily quiets feelings of insecurity and reinforces the image they want to maintain. As a result, they come to expect pursuit not as a possibility, but as an entitlement, believing that their withdrawal will automatically compel others to come running after them. Silence disrupts the narcissist's script because it removes the response they have come to expect and depend upon. In many narcissistic relationship dynamics, there is an unspoken pattern that unfolds repeatedly. The narcissist creates distance, becomes cold, ignores messages, starts an argument, or suddenly withdraws attention. They often assume that these behaviors will trigger anxiety in the other person, leading them to reach out, seek explanations, apologize, or fight to restore the connection. This reaction serves a psychological purpose. It reassures the narcissist that they still occupy a position of importance and influence in someone else's emotional world. When the expected pursuit never comes, the familiar sequence breaks down. The silence creates uncertainty where certainty once existed. Instead of receiving emotional reactions, they encounter an absence of feedback. They do not receive the frantic messages, the repeated calls, or the emotional pleas that previously confirmed their significance. This lack of response can feel unsettling because it deprives them of the validation they anticipated. The person they expected to be emotionally available on demand is no longer participating in the pattern. Silence also shifts the focus back onto them. Without someone else's emotions to manage, provoke, or control, they are left without the usual distractions that reinforce their sense of power. The withdrawal that was intended to create leverage suddenly produces no visible effect. What was expected to generate pursuit instead generates stillness. The absence of a reaction forces an unexpected reality into view. Influence is not guaranteed, attention is not automatic, and emotional control depends on the willing participation of another person. When that participation ends, the script they relied upon no longer functions as intended. Control is the real goal because for many narcissistic individuals, the relationship is often less about genuine emotional intimacy and more about maintaining a position of influence over another person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. While they may speak about love, commitment, or connection, their actions frequently reveal a deeper investment in determining the direction of the relationship and controlling how others respond to them. This need for control can appear in subtle ways, such as deciding when communication happens, setting emotional rules that apply only to others, or creating situations where people feel compelled to seek their approval. In healthy relationships, both individuals have equal value, equal voices, and equal freedom to make choices. A narcissistic dynamic often challenges this balance. The narcissist may feel most comfortable when they are the one being pursued, reassured, accommodated, or prioritized. The relationship becomes a system in which their needs, preferences, and emotions take center stage. While the other person's needs gradually receive less attention. The more someone adapts to this arrangement, the stronger the narcissist. The issue is often not the specific disagreement, boundary, or decision itself. The deeper issue is that someone has stepped outside the framework of control they had grown accustomed to. What they are losing is not merely compliance, but predictability. They can no longer assume that their actions will produce the desired response. And that uncertainty challenges the position of authority they worked hard to establish and maintain within the relationship. Your absence becomes a mirror because once you stop chasing, reassuring, explaining, or emotionally investing in the cycle, the narcissist loses one of the primary ways they avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about themselves.
In many narcissistic dynamics, the constant attention, reactions, and emotional energy provided by others act like a distraction. As long as someone is pursuing them, trying to win them back, or focusing on their needs, they can continue believing the narrative they have created about their own importance, desirability, and influence. The attention they receive serves as evidence that they are special, indispensable, or always in control. When you withdraw from the cycle and no longer provide that reflection, something changes. The image they were accustomed to seeing becomes less clear. They can no longer measure their value through your efforts, your sacrifices, or your willingness to keep the relationship alive at any cost. Without your pursuit, they are left with fewer external sources of validation to support the identity they have carefully constructed. This can create discomfort because the admiration and attention that the more anxious the other person feels, the more likely they are to reach out, seek reassurance, or make concessions they might not otherwise make. This creates a situation in which the narcissist does not have to actively demand attention. The uncertainty they create encourages others to provide it voluntarily. The waiting game also allows them to observe how much influence they still possess. By stepping back and remaining silent, they can watch for signs of pursuit, concern, or desperation. Each attempt to reconnect can be interpreted as proof that they still hold emotional significance and control. The strategy is less about resolving issues and more about measuring emotional dependence. The longer someone remains preoccupied with winning back attention or approval, the more the narcissist may feel reassured about their position within the relationship and the power they continue to exercise over its emotional dynamics. Self-respect changes the dynamic. Because it fundamentally alters the way a person responds to manipulation, pressure, and emotional uncertainty. In many narcissistic relationships, unhealthy patterns survive because one person is constantly willing to sacrifice their own needs, boundaries, and well-being in order to maintain the connection. They may tolerate disrespect, excuse harmful behavior, overlook repeated disappointments, or accept unequal treatment because they fear conflict, rejection, or abandonment. Over time, this willingness to compromise personal dignity can create a dynamic where the narcissist comes to expect compliance and accommodation as normal parts of the relationship. When self-respect begins to grow, the relationship no longer operates according to the same rules. A person with healthy self-respect starts recognizing that their feelings, needs, and boundaries are just as important as anyone else's. They become less willing to chase after someone who continually withdraws affection, less likely to justify mistreatment, and less inclined. This shift often appears subtle from the outside, but its effects can be profound. The narcissist may find this change confusing because the responses they once relied upon become less predictable. Emotional manipulation loses effectiveness when someone refuses to abandon their principles in exchange for temporary approval. Silent treatment, guilt trips, and attempts to provoke anxiety no longer produce the same level of compliance. Instead of reacting impulsively, the person begins evaluating situations through the lens of self-worth and emotional health. Self-respect also reduces emotional dependency. The relationship stops being the primary source of identity, validation, or security. As a result, the balance of power changes naturally. The individual is no longer focused on preserving the connection at any cost, but on preserving their own integrity, boundaries, and sense of personal value. The narcissistic injury emerges when the narcissist encounters a situation that threatens the image they have carefully built about themselves. This image is often based on feeling important, admired, influential, or superior in some way. While everyone experiences disappointment and rejection at times, a narcissistic individual may react more intensely because their sense of self-worth can be heavily tied to how others perceive and respond to them when they receive the attention, validation, or admiration they expect. This self-image remains intact. When those responses disappear, the stability of that image can be challenged. In the context of a relationship, a narcissistic injury often occurs when someone refuses to play the role that was expected of them. The narcissist may anticipate being pursued after creating distance, expect repeated attempts at reconciliation, or assume that their absence will generate anxiety and desperation. When none of these reactions occur, the message they receive is not merely that someone has moved on. The deeper message is that their influence may be less powerful than they believed. This realization can feel deeply unsettling because it conflicts with the narrative they have maintained about their importance. The injury is not necessarily about losing the relationship itself. It is often about losing the emotional confirmation that supported their self-image. As a result, they may respond with anger, resentment, criticism, blame, or sudden attempts to re-establish contact. These reactions can be different on the surface, but they often stem from the same source. An attempt to protect a wounded sense of self and restore the validation that once reinforced their feelings of significance, control, and emotional dominance within the relationship. Indifference is more powerful than revenge because revenge keeps a person emotionally connected to the very individual they are trying to escape. When someone has been hurt by a narcissist, it is natural to feel anger, resentment, and a desire for justice. Many people fantasize about exposing the narcissist, making them regret their actions, or finding ways to inflict the same emotional pain they experienced. While these reactions are understandable, they often keep the focus locked on the narcissist. Time, energy, and emotional resources continue to revolve around someone who has already taken up too much space in a person's life. Indifference operates differently. It is not denial, suppression, or pretending that the hurt never happened. Rather, it is the gradual process of no longer allowing the narcissist to occupy a central position in one's emotional world. Their opinions become less important. Their approval becomes unnecessary. Their reactions lose the power to dictate moods, decisions, and self-worth. This shift represents a significant psychological change because the narcissist can no longer influence the person through praise, criticism, attention, or withdrawal. Revenge often seeks a reaction. It hopes the narcissist will feel pain, embarrassment, or regret. Indifference seeks nothing. It does not require acknowledgement, validation, or accountability from the other person. Instead, it redirects attention toward personal healing, growth, and rebuilding a meaningful life. The focus moves from changing the narcissist to strengthening oneself. For many narcissists, this can be particularly difficult to understand because they are accustomed to occupying a position of emotional significance. When someone genuinely reaches a place where they no longer need to win, prove, expose, or retaliate, the narcissist loses the influence that once connected them to that person's thoughts, emotions, and daily life. When the narcissist waited for you to beg and you never did, something far more important happened than the end of a toxic pattern. You reclaimed ownership of your emotional life. For perhaps the first time in a long time,